Welcome to Murray Montgomery's Lone Star Diary. Murray is a published author and syndicated newspaper columnist. He writes nonfiction stories about the Old West, most of them about cowboys and pioneers to the Lone Star State. Other true stories with an Old West flavor from all parts of America will also be included from time to time. Murray has been writing for some 20 years for the online magazine, Texas Escapes. So sit back and relax, and enjoy these true stories of Old Texas. Now, here's Murray.
Howdy folks, glad to be back with you today on this Lone Star Diary podcast, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. This is number 8, episode number 8, and the name of this one is The Wild Woman of the Navidad. And I'm going to jump right into it. And we're going to go in just a moment. You know, the Navidad River really isn't much of a river as rivers go. It's not very famous and can't be compared to the stunning Guadalupe or the majestic Colorado when it comes to beauty. But the little old Navidad just might have a claim to fame that the others can't equal. You see, the Navidad has a past of mysterious and wild creatures of the two-legged variety, living along its winding path. In the early days of Texas, settlers living near the banks of the Navidad, southeast of Hallettsville, in Lavaca County, were subjected to visits by beings of an unknown origin. Several hairy and stealth-like individuals roamed through the brushy bottoms of the river, witnesses indicating that there was a male and a female. And many folks back then, they were convinced that the male half of the duo had died and only the female remained. And she became known as the Wild Woman of the Navidad. In his books, Tales of Old-Time Texas, well-known author J. Frank Dobie hints that there might have been even 3 of the creatures running together. But many of the old-timers agreed that there had been only 2 from the beginning. There were many who had speculated on the origin of the never-seen beings. Some thought they were runaway slaves, but as Dobie writes, to settlers living against the deep woods and dense brush along the Navidad River, no explanation was conclusive. From about 1836, which was during the Texas Revolution, through 1845, folks were still unsure if the surviving creature was male or female. One settler, Samuel Rogers, saw 3 sets of tracks in the spring of 1845, indicating that instead of one person, as previously thought, there might truly have been 3 individuals of a suspicious origin. So now there was a group of wild people. Rogers had a hired man by the name of Hall, who also had misadventures with the creatures. Hall claimed that they had taken one of his trace chains. Shortly after this incident, only 1 set of tracks were seen in the area, and again folks began to speculate that 2 of the wild people may have died. But from the size of the remaining tracks, they decided the living subject had to be a male. You know, the wild man, he would take what he needed from the farms in the area, and then he would slip into the fields and steal potatoes. In his journal, Rogers wrote, when the corn was in roasting ear, he would come nearly every night to get a supply. Rogers, along with some of his neighbors, came close to catching the wild creature once, and during the chase he dropped a basket containing various items, and Rogers added in this entry in his journal, this basket contained a shirt of mine, a novel, a Bible, and many other articles taken from the house. The shirt had been torn and the rent sewed up as skillfully as any woman could have sewed it. After the near capture of the wild man, the settlers decided to get serious about hunting him down. 8 of them searched along the junction of the Navidad and Sandy's Creek. They didn't find him, but they did find places where he'd been hiding out. One of them was a live oak that forked about 30 feet above the ground. The fork formed kind of a flat place on which he could lie down and sleep, said Rogers. So depending on what source you are reading, you will find back and forth opinions on whether or not the wild creature was male or female. I think many like to believe that it was a woman for some romantic notion and the like. In J. Frank Dobie's book, he indicates that in the late 1830s there were reports that the being was indeed a woman. According to Dobie, settlers on the lower Navidad began to see tracks of two human beings. Indications were that one was male and the other female with small, delicate feet. Various sources indicate that these individuals avoided any real mischief and stayed secluded. They only took small portions of food, and the settlers tolerated this practice. Dobie includes in his book a narrative by one of the residents living along the river who came in contact with the wild people. Martin M. Kinney kept a record of what he witnessed. Kinney surmised that the two mysterious ones were lost children who had become separated from the family during the evacuation of the area running from the invading Mexican army and what has been known as the runaway scrape. In his account, Kinney indicates that the lower tracks disappeared, or rather the larger tracks disappeared, and only those of the wild woman remained. Folks believed her to be harmless, but they still wished to capture her and take her back to the civilized world. The opinion being that she was a lost white child. Kinney wrote that she was seen once during a failed attempt to ambush her, and he described it this way. The night was dark, and they could only see a shadowy form. It was slim and apparently unclothed, but the color could not be distinguished. They sprang out to seize her, but, though they were active young men, she was more agile still and bounded away as silently and quickly as the flitting of a shadow, and was instantly lost in the darkness. The wild woman struck fear into the hearts of the slaves back then. They referred to her as it, or that thing that comes. It has been written that she could walk right past guard dogs during the night, and they wouldn't bark or disturb her in any way. She would go into the house and take bread and other food, always leaving half. If the creature took tools or any other item, she always returned them clean and in better shape than when she obtained them. But just as this had happened in the past, the question about the gender of the mysterious one came up yet again. It seems that in the severe winter of 1850, fresh tracks were found once more, and this time the scent was fresh. The settlers put hounds on the trail, and the wild being was forced to climb a tree. And looking down on his pursuers was a runaway African male. He was so frightened that he wouldn't come down, and the men had to climb the tree and take him by force. J. Frank Dobie indicated in his book that the man's tracks matched those found before, the same footprints that were thought to belong to a woman. The story goes that the wild man had been sold to slave traders by his parents and was shipped to this country. A passing sailor who knew the language of the man's tribe was able to communicate with him and learned that he and another man had escaped from the ship somewhere near a large river. His companion had perished at some point, and the wild man was left alone. Folks estimated back then that he must have been brought across the sea between 1820 and 1830, and part of his youth was spent roaming the region around the Navidad and Sandy's Creek. Slavery still existed after his capture, and the wild man was sold at public auction. And with the abolishment of slavery, he was set free and was said to have remained in his newfound home. As for the wild woman, she was never heard of again, and the legend of her existence passed into history. So that's a story of the wild woman of the Navidad, and as it turned out, it was an African male slave that they had caught. And I'll add a little postscript to this story. You know, my folks lived out in that part of the county, which is east and southeast of Hallettsville, and their land was just overrun by copperhead snakes. And then there were the mosquitoes. So you stop and think about this man living up in a tree with those snakes everywhere and still surviving is mind-boggling, to say the least. But all that area around Sandy's Creek and Speaks, Texas, and all that area, Sublime, Rock Island, is pretty much covered up with copperhead snakes, and I don't think that has changed much since those days. But anyway, friends, I hope that you enjoyed this story, and we'll be doing more later on. But in the meantime, God bless Texas, and we'll be seeing you later on.